All right. What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Danny Show. I'm your host, Dan Cody. This is where I give commentary and reviews on all things wrestling. And before I get started, I got a little funny joke to tell you. What do you call a McMahon who can't control his Mac Jr.? Well, let's just say you take the M out of McMahon and replace it with a D. You'll get it later. I can't really say it just in case my mother might watch this. But either way, Vince. Man. Yeah, that. You get it. But either way, interesting day ahead because on this day, on this very Sunday, on this very date, many years ago in 2016, WWE had Money in the Bank. And first off, let's just say that for the first time in a while, I'm doing a pay-per-view review from the past on this day. And today was the day that in 2016 we had Money in the Bank in the same location that this year's Money in the Bank is going to take place in Las Vegas. And in honor of that, as you can see, I'm rocking a Las Vegas shirt in honor of that. So, let's get started with the main highlights. We have New Day facing off against Enzo and Amore before he was what? Before he before Cassidy went to Impact. We have Enzo and Amore, New Day, as well as the Vaudevillains and the OC Club, I believe. Yeah, it was the OC. Yeah, OC. And it was a fatal four-way tag match where the New Day were successful in retaining their tag team championships. But one of the things that happened was they had a fun opening with a very fun, interesting mic segment between New Day and, if I remember correctly, Enzo and Amore themselves. Nonetheless, New Day retains. Our second match of the evening features Dolph Ziggler and Baron Corbin before he was the big bald wolf that we know him today. Now, this was when Corbin was coming out pretty strong. He was never a likable character, of course, but because he's good at being a heel. But he was never a likable character. He was good at making you dislike him, but he was the lone wolf with the long hair at the time. I actually had a dream the other night about wolves. That's interesting. But either way, Corbin was just coming to the main roster pretty strong, leaving NXT to win the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal at WrestleMania 32, and now he picked a rivalry with Dolph Ziggler. And he took control early during the match and he dominated most of the match. And it all started with that fist that he used because he is a global boxing champion. And of course, Dolph Ziggler tried to fight back, and it took two famous attempts to, but the third time was the charm, just like Billy Gunn. I think Dolph Ziggler likes D Generation X because he takes the sweet chin music just like Michaels, and he does the famouser just like Billy Gunn. There was a particular moment during the match where Dolph attempted something, but he slipped on the stairs and got caught in the deep six. But we would eventually see Dolph fight back with a sweet chin music, as was mentioned earlier. That's where later it got interesting. But the end of days was able to put Dolph down, and Baron Corbin, before he was the big bald wolf, builds momentum. Darn, darn, darn. The next match of the main card, we had a women's tag match featuring Dana Brooke and Charlotte Flair, who has married Andrade recently. Congratulations. Dana Brooke and Charlotte faced off against Natalya and Becky Lynch before John Cena knew who Becky Lynch was. Heart and Fire, as they were called at the time, before Kaylee Ray changed her name. I don't know why WWE keeps letting folks change their names. But either way, Natalya was isolated for the most part, and then Becky Lynch comes in like a house of fire. Somehow Natalya gets back in and puts Charlotte Flair in the sharpshooter, and Dana comes in, attacks Natalya, and rams her into Becky Lynch, and then natural selection to Natalya, and Charlotte and Dana win. Then later on, post match attack by Natalya. And what we didn't know is that years later, when John Cena knew who Becky Lynch was, at 2019's edition of SummerSlam, it would the pay-per-view would be opened up with an amazing female submission match between Natalya and Becky Lynch, one of my all-time favorite women's matches. Next match of the evening, we have Shake It Sheamus when he had that mohawk that had fans chanting, "You look stupid," versus Apollo Crews, who also left NXT to come to WWE's roster. So, this all started with Sheamus bragging about being in the Ninja Turtle movie and insulting Apollo Crews, and Apollo Crews punched him in the face backstage, leading to this match where Sheamus took control for the first 5 minutes of the match, but Apollo Crews was very competitive because the match started physical very early. Apollo Crews was very competitive, going for a belly to belly that sent Sheamus out of the ring and had Sheamus on the ground long enough for Apollo to go for the moonsault onto the ground and catch Sheamus. Sheamus would then go on to deliver a super white noise from the second rope, and shockingly, Apollo Crews kicked out and turned it into a roll up pin for the victory. And that was good momentum for Apollo Crews. Little did we know that Apollo Crews would go on to channel his Nigerian heritage, bringing the accent and winning the Intercontinental Championship, and like Dolph Ziggler, who we mentioned earlier, returned to NXT. And I would love to, and I can't wait to see Apollo versus Braun Breaker someday for the NXT Championship. That's going to be great. The electricity that came alive when Apollo Crews returned last week to NXT, the other week rather, to NXT was awesome. Looking forward to seeing what Apollo does. I noticed he didn't exactly lose the accent. If he did, Triple H would have been on him like he did Kofi many years ago in 2009. But either way, that was then, and I think Apollo Crews is getting greater with time. Can't wait to see what happens next. But I will say this: if I'm in a restaurant and somebody's arguing, I'm crawling out of that thing because I'm scared shots gonna start busting out. Apollo Crews went and fought the guy who was being mean to the waitress. I would have crawled out of there because I thought bullets would have started flying. This second match was supposed to be a dream match for the ages, but the ending was kind of crooked. We had AJ Styles versus John Cena, and the crowd was very mixed. It was electric, but the crowd was mixed, despite the fact that AJ Styles had recently made a heel turn to join the OC. So, excuse me. Mixed reaction. First 3 minutes of the match, we saw amateur skills on display, which AJ Styles dominated for the most part. AJ dominated the first most of the 10 minutes of the match, and then it got interesting when John Cena came with the STF. At the time was just STF. Earlier in his career, there was a U afterwards, which means something I can't repeat. But the STF was there. Then we saw the calf crusher later on, and John Cena was able to go for an AA for a 2 count. We also saw a Styles Clash, which, according to The Undertaker, Michelle McCool does better. But either way, we saw the Styles Clash for a 2 count. John Cena went for his second AA, which during that moment, AJ's foot accidentally knocked out the referee, and because the ref was down, it gave the OC, Anderson and Gallows, a chance to come in and hit their double teaming finishing move for AJ to pin him while the ref recovered. The ref didn't see what happened, so the ref counted, and the win was good. The match was pretty good, but it was a little bit of a tainted match to some. Even JBL, of all people, who is a pro heel commentator, you look at the pro heel commentators, you have JBL, you have Bobby the Brain Heenan, WWE version, not the WCW version, but WWE version. You have no, that's not Gorilla. Gorilla was the babyface commentator. Uh, Jesse the Body Ventura. Jesse the Body Ventura was also pro heel commentator. Jerry Law was like that himself, unless you were a female. He'll just worship anything that's female. But either way, JBL, being a pro heel commentator, thought the match was crooked, but thankfully we would get a rematch later on at SummerSlam, which I might cover. But that match at SummerSlam was off the hook, and it wasn't tainted. Also, I mentioned the tag match between Becky Lynch Natalya versus Dana Brooke and Charlotte. Dana and Charlotte won that one, but at the next pay per view Battleground, WWE would be treated to a special treat of Bayley's WWE debut from NXT, and the crowd popped for that match. Our next match was what the pay per view is actually all about, and it was the Money in the Bank ladder match that featured Chris Jericho, Cesaro, Sami Zayn before he was annoying, and Del Rio, Kevin Owens, and now whom we know as Jon Moxley, at the time, Dean Ambrose. So it was a lot of interesting factors into this match. You have Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, who were a part of the Intercontinental Championship ladder match that took place at WrestleMania earlier that year. They were a part of that match. Then you have two rivals, Chris Jericho and Dean Ambrose, before he was Jon Moxley, and you have those two with their personal problems. So you have Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens fighting it out, and then Mox and Jericho fight it out. We saw Sami Zayn fly early. One of the things that I found real interesting, some of the highlights that took place, we had Cesaro, who has his James Bond entrance, uppercuts both Mox, Y2J, and Del Rio. Then Kevin Owens comes in and does a cannonball on the other three men as well. Then you have Sami Zayn comes in and Haluva kicks Moxley, and then gives a Haluva kick to two men who will become future best buds later on that year, Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho. And this was right around the time Chris Jericho was starting to get that list. Also, Del Rio had Cesaro in the armbar, and Kevin Owens super kicked Del Rio off. Cesaro leaps off the ladder onto the ropes and does a flying uppercut onto Kevin Owens. That was a great highlight. I really enjoyed that. Kevin Owens put Sami Zayn on a ladder and went for a frog splash. Cool highlight. And then we have Cesaro swinging Del Rio and Chris Jericho, except Chris Jericho was swung and hit the ladder. Then another interesting thing happened is that they built a ladder bridge / castle, and all six guys fought on that ladder castle bridge, as I like to call it. And we saw Kevin Owens powerbomb Sami Zayn, and Jericho gets the DDT from Moxley, and then it would actually end up with Moxley and Jericho fighting before Moxley was able to be the last guy on the ladder to win that ladder match. Keep Moxley in mind because I'm going to mention him a little bit later. First and foremost, let me just say I really enjoyed that promo that they used to build up the Money in the Bank, and it was a song called Black Honey by Thrice. That was a good song, by the way. I really enjoyed that promo, by the way. It was real awesome. But moving on to the last match before the main event, we had Rusev versus Titus O'Neil, and it was short but very physical match because you don't mess with another man's family. especially on Father's Day. Today happens to be Father's Day, so happy Dad Day to those of you who are present. But either way, Titus is actually humanitarian at the time and Father of the Year. And Rusev, who was introduced at the time by Lana, his wife, and I got to ask, how does Rusev slash Miro feel about Lana becoming an OnlyFans performer? Now, I just gotta say, everybody that think they pretty going on OnlyFans. I mean, Lana's on OnlyFans. Natalya's sister is trying to get her to go on OnlyFans, and I'm like, why does everybody gotta go to OnlyFans? Just you're wrestlers. Just be wrestlers. But either way, it was a very physical match because you Rusev taunted Titus's kids, and you don't do that. Titus got physical. He manhandled Rusev, and he did the pump handle slam. That wasn't enough to keep him down. But when Rusev went for those karate kicks and all, and that camel clutch, he was able to retain his United States Championship. But the fact is, Rusev was in a physical match for messing with another man's family. Don't do it. Now let's get to this main event match between Seth Rollins and the Tribal Chief, before he was the Tribal Chief, Roman Reigns. Now, for those of you who haven't seen it, I included this match on a countdown that I did for my top favorite matches from Seth Rollins. So if you haven't seen that, be sure to check it out. But let's get into deeper details on why I put that match on my Seth Rollins list. So, Rollins, first of all, was the favorite despite being a heel at the time, a returning heel at the time. He had returned after an amazing match with AJ Styles at Extreme Rules. So, the match had Rollins as the favorite and Roman as not the favorite, even though Roman was supposed to be the babyface. But Roman dominated most the first 10 minutes of that match. And it didn't help that Seth Rollins slapped him during that time where Roman's had control. But I have to say, I love that Razor's Edge turned powerbomb that Roman used to do. That was great. Seth Rollins eventually took control with a running suicida and a running senton from the top rope running down. Now, we also saw Roman go for a Superman punch, but that was just a 2 count. I don't know if Kevin Owens is a Eddie Guerrero fan, but we all know that, like Sasha Banks, who unfortunately reportedly has been released, Seth Rollins is an Eddie Guerrero fan. After a running knee, we saw a perfectly executed frog splash from Seth Rollins. And of course, I love this other move that he does. It's called the Falcon Arrow Bomb. That one was awesome. And thankfully, we didn't get to see him do any sunset flips because that's how he got injured in the first place. Rollins also did a turnbuckle powerbomb, but that was followed by a Superman punch. I thought that was epic and awesome to see. To have Rollins execute something and then Roman come back and say, nope, that's not going to keep me down, and I'm not going down without punching you and taking you down with me first. Of course, we would later see Roman eventually go for his finisher, which is the spear, but it will only get a 2 count. And this is the part that I really love about the match. That Roman, in going for his second attempt at the spear, would get caught at a pedigree. That was a thing of beauty right there. The first one didn't keep Roman down, but the second one did put Roman down, and Seth Rollins regained the WWE Championship that you see up there. However, the night wasn't over because the man who won the Money in the Bank ladder match, Dean Ambrose, came, cashed in by attacking Seth from behind with the briefcase, and the crowd was happy that Seth won, but the crowd was deafening when Dean Ambrose, Moxley now, won the championship. And you know what's so ironic? If you pay attention to the opening promo of the pay-per-view, you notice that Dean Ambrose was standing in the middle of Rollins and Romans and saying, maybe I win Money in the Bank and cash in. That was the end of the opening promo. And then you see the promo for the ladder match, and the promo ends with Dean Ambrose pointing at the briefcase. So there were signs that they were booking Dean Ambrose to win that match, and we're glad that he did. And he will go on to have a great triple threat match with the other two members of the show before being drafted to SmackDown. So to me, I thought the Money in the Bank event 2016 was a pretty good event. What did you think about that year? Let me know in the comment section below. I'm your host, Daniel Cody. That's all the time I have for you today, and I'll be back with another review on all things wrestling. Peace out.